Hello students, good morning to all of you. Welcome to this virtual class. Last period we are discussing the colonial exploitations under the British rule. Colonial exploitations under the British rule. How that Britishers were established the colonies and what are the objectives to establish that colonies, and about that internal trade, external trade and tariff. All these points we have already discussed. Today we'll start the agriculture sector. And this agriculture sector on the eve of independence and mid 18th century. Before the Britishers came to our country, India has predominantly been an agricultural country. 85% of the country's population, 85% of the country's population depending their livelihood in their village areas. It means under the British colonial rule systems, 85% of the country's population depending on their livelihood on that agriculture sectors. Large proportion of people earn their daily bread from agriculture sectors, and about 70% of the total labor force, 70% of the total labor force in the country we are depending on agriculture sectors. So I want to explain the state of agriculture during the mid 18th century of India. Before Britishers were ruling to our country, what was the condition of our Indian economy system? That basic characteristics of Indian agriculture was first point, that is called that subsistence occupations. Subsistence occupation. Characteristics. Characteristics of Indian agriculture systems in that mid 18th centuries. So what to mean by subsistence occupations? First point, subsistence occupations. What do you mean by subsistence occupations? SUBSI, subsistence, STENC, subsistence occupations. What do you mean by subsistence? It means during this mid 18th century, our farmers or our peasants or the tillers or those who are depending on that agriculture sector, their sole aim that to produce all these products for themselves, or for themselves means here that for their family members. The farmers, what they were producing, not for the market, that was only for themselves. And that much production they were producing, which was required for their own consumptions. Above all, we can conclude here the subsistence occupation means the farmers how much need how much need for their own consumption, for their own consumption. That much they have to produce, that is to be called, or they were producing that time, that was to be called that subsistence consumptions, subsistence occupations, subsistence economy. It means these people, they were not depending on any other peoples, they were not depending on any other countries. It means how much they required for his own family members, that much they were producing, they were not excess productions. Likewise, at present time, farmers producing for that market, they will sell that product in the market and they will earn that profits. But during this mid 18th centuries, the sole aim of the producer was that to produce that product for their own family members or for themselves, not for the market. That is to be called that subsistence occupation. It means their profession or their production or the producer who were producing that product was only for their own consumption and their family members. That types of occupation is to be called that subsistence occupations. Now you are clear about the meaning of subsistence occupations. So they were very self-dependent. They are not depending on others. So the farmers at that time, those are producing that agriculture products, that product was for only for themselves or their family members. They were not selling that product in the market. Again, whatever the production they were producing, at present time we are looking in the market, there are different types of products like rice, wheat, sugarcane, cotton, tea, tobacco, etc., etc., edible oil, etc., etc. So all these products can be classified into two groups. One is food crops, another is that cash crops. But that time, that is the second point, the farmers, those who were producing that sole and primary crops was food crops. Primary crops was food crops. It means sole aim to production to meet that domestic requirement. What do mean domestic requirements? Likewise, today's families, we need the rice, we need the wheat, we need the different kinds of edible oil. So how much we require, that much we have to produce. That is to be called that primary crops, we are that food crops. It means the Indian farmer concentrated basically on their food crops like rice, wheat, etc. Whenever and wherever cash crops were grown, these were required to meet that for self requirements of the farmers. It means how much jute I required, how much cotton I required, that much we will produce, or that much the farmer will produce, not they will produce that maximum output of that cotton, maximum out of the jute, or maximum out of the oil seeds or that edible oil. Because there was no such type of organized market at present, what types of market we are looking? If they will produce that excess production, suppose they will produce the maximum cotton, because cotton could be used to produce that yarn of clothes. So if there were no such types of market, so that where they will sell their excess product, that is why they were producing that much products, cash crops. how much they we are requiring that time. That was that aim, not to produce that more cash crops, but produce that food crops. So whenever Britishers came to our country, the systems, the traditions, that was the sole aim of that farmers, gradually, slowly, that to be collapsed. Although we can say that that time our economy was the stagnant economies. I will discuss later on what do you mean stagnant economies. But that two characteristics of that agriculture was, number one, subsistence occupations, number two, primary crops. So primary crops were the food crops. Whenever we are presenting now the different types of marketing, we have gone through the different types of market: perfect competition market, imperfect competition market, monopoly, monopolistic markets. Or at present there is that imperfect competition market, different types of market, among all them that monopolistic market which is existing at present time. That time there was no such type of organized markets. So that is the third characteristics. There was no organized market. Third is that there is no organized market. Third point you may write, there was no organized markets. Organized market means like you will go to that sabji mandi, you will purchase the different kinds of fruits and vegetables like this. But that time there was no such types of markets. So that is why the third point is that there was no organized market. During that mid 18th century, there was no organized markets for sale of that agriculture products. What do I? For sale of agricultural products, agriculture products. It means at present time which we are producing the maximum output, or that output can be sold in the market, and that time there was no such type markets. And if we are producing more that goods, maximum that goods which are to be exported, that time that procedure was not available. Because when that Britishers came to our country and they imposed that heavy tax of our goods, like our handicrafts on that day I was asking. So similarly, as a result of that, whenever the price rises by including the more and more tax, heavy tax on the export of the goods, the other country will not be interested to purchase that goods. So whenever the goods will not be sold in the market, in the international market, the producer will not be interested to produce that kinds of products. So that Indian handicrafts work was to be reduced, self-dependence was to be abolished gradually. So farmers produced by and large their self-consumptions during that mid-18th century. Only the surplus products, which was very few, which was left that time, after that meeting of one requirements, or after the meeting of all consumption requirements, what was that little bit excess after their consumptions, that was to be disposed of. Remember it. What is that? Huge. To produce that maximum outputs, because that will the loser, they will be the loser on this ground, because they will not be sold in the markets. That provision of the market was not available at that times like at present times. So that they were not interested to produce that maximum output. Invariably, the surplus was never large like at present times the farmers were producing the large amount of products. I have already said there is that maximum support price, which is to the farmers get that minimum supports to stand in their one leg or to stand their backbone but because farmers are the backbone of our countries. So the surplus invariably was never large. If there was a little bit surplus, at that time there was the one group of the people which is to be called that Baniya, or we may say that Jagat Guru, etc. would take care of the surplus. थोड़ा बहुत जो बच जाता है वो surplus वो बनिया group जो people है they were using it. Hence there was no need for any organized markets, so that excess product what was at that time by their farmers they were giving or they were selling to that Baniya group of the peoples, so that at that time there was no available market, or at present time which market we are looking, there was no organizing market for the sale of that agriculture products. And what about that excess product after their consumptions? Who will look after it? That time there was a local merchant which are to be called the Baniya did exist and operate in the villages. जो भी थोड़ा बहुत बच जाता है they were operating, but they never had any significant role play in the economic life of the farmers at that time, because whenever that excess product, there was no organized market, there was no external relations to that any other part of the countries like present times whichever we are looking. That is why that what was the little bit surplus after the consumptions, that was to be handed over to the local merchants. So at that time local merchant did exist. So fourth point, the role of the local merchants. Local merchants, they did their role in such a way that, or they have no significant role in the economy. So these are the main four features or four characteristics of that Indian agriculture during that mid 18th centuries. These are the four features. What? Agriculture was that subsistence occupations. Second was that primary crops were the food crops. Third was that there were no organized market for selling of that productions, agriculture products. And fourth one, local merchants did exist and operational in village. There is no such importance of that local merchants. These are the four features of that Indian agriculture systems. So whenever I was said about that agriculture sectors, when that 85% of the country's population under the British colonial rule lived mostly in villages and derived directly or indirectly from that agriculture. So that time, that is to be called that stagnant economy. What is stagnant economy? I will explain more. What do you mean by stagnant economy? Try to understand the meaning of the stagnant economy. Stagnant means which is the constants. It means like the water in that pool and in the river. तालाब का पानी और रिवर का पानी देख लीजिए. In the pool or the pond, the water is constant, but in the river the water is flowing, increasing and decreasing ways. So when that economy is constant, it means agriculture sector, industrial sector, there is no up and down, or which is the little bit up and down, which is that insignificance. That types of economy, national, at present we are measuring the national income, per capita income, which is always constant. If it increases little bit, that is to be called that stagnant economies. So that is called that stagnations. When the Britishers came to our country and they started their ruling to our country through that colonial systems, their sole aim was like this: they have to develop their own country, so that they have sole aim to exploit the resources of our Indian resources. So that is why they make policy in such a way that is to be called that brain drain systems. So that Indian economic condition was to be grow. Indian conditions was to be very moved towards that gradually started to decline. That condition was not to be improved. That is why that sole objectives of that created in that Britishers' mind, how that Indian people will be exploited, how that Indian resources will be destroyed, how that growth of the Indian economy will be checked, or how we can improve by Indian resources. So that is why on that day I was telling that they tried to impose that heavy taxes on that export of the goods so that the goods will not be sold in other countries. So accordingly, we'll start in the next periods, that is the conditions of this colonial systems about that trade, internal trade, external trade, cash crops, investments, sharecropping, farmers or tillers. These are the systems which I will discuss later. Thank you very much.